Okay, so this is the third part and entering the more significant territory of my experience with bullying. At this point, and I want to, as I say before, I'm not a fan of trigger warnings and content warnings and all that, but if you are someone who feels you'll be upset by hearing descriptions, fairly graphic descriptions of bullying, I would recommend you go somewhere else. But the last segment of this had a few more was more on kind of the amusing anecdote end of the spectrum, although there were some more serious moments. This is where it gets serious, and I had alluded in that video to how I wanted to do some cultural explanation, some cultural anthropology here to talk about, kind of help you understand something. Now, in this video, we will move right to that, because I'm going to be describing two individuals, one of them more so than the other, that forever altered who I am as a person, who made it their conscious and daily effort to drain me of any hope, any self-worth, any uh, concept of decency about myself that I ever had, that terrorized me and made me feel in daily fear for my life, um, did things to me that were criminal, things for which they should have been put in jail for, things for which they very nearly were put in jail for, and things that have stayed with me until this very day, that have fundamentally shaped who I am, and for better and for worse, that have stayed with me, and not a day in the roughly 25 years now that I have been, or close to 20 plus years, whatever, I can't do math right now, but in all the years that I have been a legal adult since I moved on from this time in my life, I have thought about this every day, every single day, and not voluntarily. It follows me, it haunts me, and you will probably come away with this with a very revelatory understanding of who I am and why I am the way I am in a lot of ways. So, Mississippi. I want to tell you something that may be surprising to you. I actually think Mississippi is really incredible. It is really a really fascinating, beautiful place. And there is a lot to Mississippi that gets ignored because of the admittedly understandable stereotype about Mississippi being a hotbed of redneck ignorance and white supremacy and all that sort of thing. Now, everything you've heard in that regard is true. Mississippi has a very dark, depraved, and tragic history as a place of bigotry and hatred and oppression, but it is out of that oppression and out of the opposition to that oppression and that bigotry, that the good things have grown out of it, that incredible works of art and literature and music and cinema and stage plays have all been created and written, and great civil rights movements have originated in places like Mississippi and Arkansas and all of these places we associate with bigotry, because those are the places where people did rise up and do the right thing and move this country forward. Those were ground zero for those places. And it's probably, if you've never lived for an extended period of time in Mississippi, you probably would not be able to understand why people are so captivated by it, by its history, by its the arts and culture there, the literature, and that sort of thing. But it really is a fascinating place, and it's a place where fascinating stories have been told and fascinating stories have been lived out. And it took me a long time to appreciate that. And what's amazing is learning to appreciate that and learning that I could have a Mississippi that was mine. That just like I live here in Atlanta and there's millions of assholes I have to put up with every day, those assholes don't rule out my experience of Atlanta and the Atlanta that I love. I learned that I could have that about Mississippi too, and I'm grateful for it. And now I visit this town that I'm referring to. I'm going to tell you about. I visit it without hesitation. And I have, pardon me, I have a wonderful time when I'm there. And also, 20 plus years have gone by, and the town has made a lot of progress. It has a very active and prominent LGBT scene. And I know that in my videos here, I talk about at times about the more irritating and annoying public figures associated with that scene. But it really is incredible to walk down Main Street and see rainbow flags in some of the storefront windows, where previously those windows on that Main Street would have been festooned with Confederate flags and that sort of thing. Nearly everything associated with the bigotry and the associations with the glorification of the Confederacy has been removed from this town. And good on them. There are still a few outstanding monuments that need to come down, but by and large, the people on the whole have done a very good thing, and that's what blew me away when I started going back as an adult. And it's important to acknowledge that progress. I know that it's a lot of fun to make fun of rednecks and hillbillies, and I understand. Certainly, I've done plenty of it myself, and I don't begrudge you doing that. They make for very tempting targets at times, but it's also important to understand and acknowledge when people have made an attempt to move forward. So, as I tell you this story, though, I want you to understand something about Southern culture. See, there's this expression that you will hear a lot coming out of places like Mississippi, where they say that outsiders, people outside their community, don't understand the Southern way of life. That is not just a dismissive statement. There are some things about Southern culture that people will not understand. If you're not raised in the culture, you won't understand it. And one of those things, obviously, the number one thing we talk about nowadays when we talk about the antebellum South is slavery, and understandably so. And it's important to understand the reasons why slavery took off in those particular states. Well, it was practiced in the southern United States. One of them was just a practical reason, which was that you had a very agrarian society, and unskilled forced labor could be implemented easily in that area. And so that is one just practical reason why it happened there. But one very important thing to understand about Southern culture is that it was a culture that was derived from a people, it was a culture derived from people who wanted to maintain and celebrate feudalism. They wanted to they believed in a world of kings and queens, and of aristocracy and royalty and that sort of thing, and they wanted to maintain that way of life in the United States. And that's something that is crucial to understanding what people say when they talk about understanding the Southern way of life. That is very important to understand, because you have to understand, think about, if you have any awareness of the traditions that are associated with Southern culture. We hear about things like plantation weddings and debutante balls and all of this regal pageantry and all of that stuff. Where does that come from? It comes from a people, again, that wanted to celebrate feudalism, that wanted to live in a feudalist culture, a culture where kings and queens reign over them. And critical to that way of life is what's known as the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings is a concept that's used to maintain feudalist cultures, and it's a belief held and enforced and maintained within the culture that if a person is born into the aristocracy, into the monarchy, into any kind of ruling class, then they must be there because as the divine right of kings would hold, that they must have been then put there by God. And so it's this idea, and it's a very old idea. It's a pre-Christian idea. It goes back to, like in ancient Rome, the reason Jesus Christ was referred to as the one true Son of God, God's only begotten Son, was because in Rome, ancient Rome at the time, you were required by law to say that Caesar was the Son of God and worship Caesar as the Son of God. So the divine right of kings goes way, way back. It is a very old, very deeply ingrained concept. And I bring that up because one of the central things to understand in this story that I want to tell you is that we're talking about a person the person that more than any other ruined my childhood and left me with scars that I bear to this day. You're going to wonder why he was enabled by the people in the community that enabled him. Why did they allow him to do this? Why did they allow him to get away with this stuff? And it took me a long time to understand, and researching, a lot of researching of Southern culture and Southern ideals, and realizing how these people were operating and everything. And, we talk about the word systemic is, I think, widely overused, but this is a systemic reality of how Southern culture, these small town Southern cultures, carry themselves and everything. And it is this idea that by the divine right of kings, you have to understand that there are people who see themselves as feeling honored by having been screwed over by the ruling class, by the aristocracy. They think that, there are people, because of the divine right of kings, there are people who literally believe that if the king walks by and takes a dump on your head, you should feel honored to have had a royal dump taken on your head. Like, no matter how badly the king treats you, or the king's cabinet or his royal contingent treats you, no matter how badly they shit on you and treat you and run you into the mud, you are honored to have had that happen to you. And that is a very deeply ingrained belief. And I bring that up because the person that I'm referring to, so there's going to be two people I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to keep their names private, but I'm just going to call them Thing 1 and Thing 2 for this. Now, Thing 2 actually enters the story before Thing 1, but you'll see why I designate the latter as Thing 1. So, I talked about in the first video where I was talked about being abused by my third grade teacher who found out that I had gone to a private school, and she assumed I must be some sort of rich, arrogant brat that was putting on airs and that sort of thing and felt it was her need to tear me down. Well, the kid that I'm talking about, thing one, would have done very well to have been exposed to her because he actually was that person. He was just close your eyes and imagine the person that comes to mind when I say the words, "Do you have any idea who my father is?" He was exactly that person. A person who I would be very surprised if he has ever wiped his own ass once in his life. And he was very much an outgrowth of that old Southern way of life. And concurrent to that, I want you to understand that there was an organization that was very prominent in Mississippi at the time called the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Sons of Confederate Veterans was essentially it touted itself as being a fraternal order for men who were the descendants of Confederate soldiers to get together and celebrate their supposedly glorious history and all of this, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time, it was treated as like this kind of very prestigious sort of organization to be a part of, like being a part of your local Knights of Columbus or your local Rotary Club or Freemasons or something like that, like this very prestigious order to be a part of. And the thing was, it's really just a front for racism. Nowadays, and this is one of the reasons that the city I'm referring to has made so much progress, is because the Sons of Confederate Veterans does not have the stranglehold on the local culture that it once did. Now it is widely known that the Sons of Confederate Veterans, far from just being about celebrating the bravery of Confederate soldiers or something like that, was actually just a front for the white power movement. And racism and bigotry and sowing seeds of hate and contempt were very much their goal all along. When I was there in Mississippi, they had a kind of a way through their website where you could report what they called heritage violations. And a heritage violation was if you became aware of anyone in your local community that was talking about the Confederacy and the Civil War, the secession from the United States, and specifically the Confederacy and the Confederate Army in a way that they did not approve of, you could report a heritage violation. And so what would happen, there were stages to a heritage violation. First, they would start writing letters to the person in question. Then they would start calling them on the phone. Then they would go meet with them in person. And I remember looking on their website, and it didn't say what specifically happened after they went and talked to the person in person. But I remember there was one of the guys that was like on the board of directors for the whole thing at the time, had included some kind of notice there that, when you go to confront people, be sure not to use violence. And he said, it was like, as much as I understand the desire to take a 2x4 upside their heads, be sure you don't use violence. And so, that was kind of the mode they were in. They were a pressure group to intimidate people for, to not portray the South or portray the Confederacy in a certain way. Everybody in this gang that I am about to tell you about was affiliated with the SCV in some way. And that, I do believe that had a very strong influence on them and really shaped the way they acted and the way they saw the world. And as I'm talking about this, the Southern way of life, I want you to think about something. One of the reasons that this attitude persists is because of a certain book that has been very popular that was written and published almost 100 years ago. You may be able to guess the book that I am talking about. You see, during the 1930s, the United States was experiencing the Great Depression. People were not happy, and they were living in times of extraordinary economic hardship. And what's interesting is, as we know, in times of extraordinary economic hardship, the one boom industry is always the entertainment industry, because people want escapism. They want to escape from the doldrums and the pain of their daily existence. And so at the time, you still had people that could remember life in the Old South. Now, bear in mind, most of these people were very young, would have been very young during the Old South, but they had their childhoods in the Old South. And so you had people whose grannies and grandmommies and granddaddies told them beautiful stories about their nostalgic memories of the Old South, because that's how nostalgia works. When we want to remember the time we lived in as children as being some kind of, before we had to take on adult responsibilities, as being some kind of beautiful, idyllic time. Think about it now. 80s culture, 1980s culture is very much in vogue. And we remember the music of the time period, and the fashions, and the filmmaking techniques, and, things like shows like Stranger Things are doing very well. We don't stop to think about, we don't stop to think about AIDS and the Iran-Contra affair and the Cold War and all of these things. We don't stop to think about all of the stuff that was going on in the 80s that was absolutely horrible, because we just remember the best. So you had a time period in which people, going back to the 1930s, where you had people that needed escapism, and they were nostalgic for the Old South, or even just stories about the Old South. And into that time period comes a little book called Gone with the Wind. And Gone with the Wind was was obviously a tremendous bestseller, followed quickly by a movie based on Gone with the Wind. Now, I am not a fan of the story that is told in Gone with the Wind, because it celebrates what I see as some very awful people. I feel absolutely no sympathy for Scarlett O'Hara whatsoever. That, oh, boo-hoo for you. You have to go work to support yourself now, because all of the money that your family made off of slave labor is no longer supporting you. Yeah, tomorrow's another day, bitch. Anyway, yeah, so I cannot relate to the story of Gone with the Wind at all. It's absolutely asinine, and there are good moments in it. There's a moment where Scarlett O'Hara in the film, where Scarlett O'Hara is confronted by a soldier that intends to rape her, and kills him, and that's a very well done, very tense scene. I mean, I can appreciate good filmmaking and that sort of thing, and certainly the film, from a technical standpoint, is amazingly well done. There are beautiful shots in that movie that are still beautiful to this day. I don't deny any of that from a technical standpoint. But I don't relate to the story at all. Also, I think Vivien Leigh looks like olive oil. So, oh, by the way, just a side note, and there was an organization called Daughters of the Confederacy that protested the casting of Vivien Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara on the grounds that only an authentic Southern woman should be playing Scarlett O'Hara. So, to all of you people out there who start crowing about how the oh-so-progressive people that start crowing about how an actor of this ethnicity should not play an actor of this ethnicity and all of that crap, this is the proud legacy you're carrying on. Congratulations. Anyway, But Gone with the Wind really took off, and obviously it is not historically accurate. It is written entirely as a delirious masturbation fantasy for for memories of a southern United States that never existed. But crucially, now this quote I'm going to read is in the movie. I would assume it occurs in the book at some point as well. I have not read the book. I've only seen the movie. But there is a quote from Ben Hecht that appears in the movie that is crucial to understanding how the people I'm going to be talking about here view the Southern way of life. And if you doubt me at all that these were people who are celebrating a way of life that goes back to the old world of monarchies and kings and aristocracy and rulers and all of that, listen to this quote. There was a land of cavaliers and cotton fields called the Old South. Here in this pretty world, gallantry took its last bow. Here was the last ever to be seen of knights and their ladies fair, of master and of slave. Look for it only in books, for it is no more than a dream remembered, a civilization gone with the wind. The people I'm about to talk about really took that to heart. And, you know, if you watch, like I said, if you watch Gone with the Wind, it is a just almost deliriously hallucinatory love letter to a utopian vision of the southern United States that never actually existed. But that is what these people, that idea, though, of it being a world of knights and kings and queens was very much a part of what they call the Southern way of life and the way they looked at the world during the antebellum era, during the years of slavery, the pre-Civil War South and everything. That really is how they saw it. And that was memorialized, that feeling, that idea was memorialized and Gone with the Wind, and that quote, I think, really summarizes it and seals it. And stop for a minute. Stop for a minute and think about everything that was just said in that quote, and how that quote was, that statement that he makes, beautifully worded, poetically worded. It fills your mind with all of this imagery, and it is beautifully written. And think about all of the people, the many millions and millions of people who have gotten drunk off of the nostalgia evoked by that quote and that attitude and everything, which is what's celebrated in Gone with the Wind. That is what we are working off of. That is, that's the kind of people we're dealing with. I'm trying to put this into a comfortable episodic format. So I don't know if I want to go long on this one because I feel like I've done enough to really to kind of set the stage here. So I think I'm going to leave it at this. These are just concepts that are very important for understanding everything that happened next.